Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's REI weekly lesson. And on today's show, I'm going to talk about the truth about subject to investing because that topic is getting very popular. And I see a lot of people out there running around doing deals that don't make any sense. So if you are not familiar with me, my name is Greg Helbeck. I've been a full-time real estate entrepreneur for almost a decade now. All this information is real world practical knowledge. This is not regurgitated theory out of a book. Everything you're going to learn here is from my experience or the experience of my guests. So if you do get value from today's show, if you could do me a favor, subscribe to our podcast and also our YouTube channel, as well as share the show on social media. Without further ado, the truth about subject to investing. Now, at the end of the day, the only real good piece of advice I can give you about any sort of real estate investing, you have to have solid principles that you go by. And then based on the principles that you have, you then decide, does this make sense to buy subject to? Does this make sense to own or finance? I see too many people out there just doing deals to do deals. So like the truth about subject to investing, and if you're not familiar with that, it's basically when you are going out and you're buying a house and instead of actually raising that money, paying cash, you're buying the house by taking over the seller's mortgage and the mortgage is staying in the seller's name and then the seller is transferring the deed into your name. So in theory, the seller is still on the hook for the payments, even though they don't own the property. So it could be a little risky, but sometimes it is actually a really legitimate strategy and it can get people out of trouble if there's no equity or if it's in foreclosure. So I do believe in subject to investing. I think it's a solid strategy. It can help people and it can also be a way to get good deals. But I see so many people online trying to wholesale subject to deals that make no sense. So let me tell you the red flags you want to look out for when you're doing a subject to deal. Number one, if there's a really high entry fee, which is essentially when the wholesaler or even the seller, it depends on the situation, they're asking for like a giant down payment. They're asking for $50,000 or $100,000 down. The house value's like 400,000 or less. That's a red flag. That either means the wholesaler's making way too much money, the seller wants too much money down, maybe there's too much money owed. But the whole thing is not only are you stepping into something that doesn't have a lot of equity, but you have a big down payment. So if something goes wrong with the deal, not only is the seller in trouble because their mortgage is going to be back in default, but you have a ton of money out on the street into this house. And the whole point of subject to is you get in there with not a ton of money and you can improve the property, rent the property, whatever the case is. So if they're asking for a huge down payment, I'd get out of there unless there is a situation where the mortgage is legitimately behind a year, maybe 2 years. Then in that case, you have no choice but to catch that mortgage up. So that's the first red flag. Here's the second thing. Now, just because you could buy a house creatively doesn't mean you should. So I see a lot of people out there, they'll buy a house with literally no equity, buy it for $300,000 and the property will be worth $310,000. There's $10,000 of equity, which is basically nothing. And now if you're independently wealthy, I think that's not a bad idea, but a lot of people are brand new and they have no money and they're trying to buy these houses with no equity and taking people's payments over. So if the house doesn't have a lot of equity and you're not a complete expert in this business, avoid it at all costs. I don't think you should be investing subject to at all if you're brand new, unless you have a mentor. And now the last thing about subject to that you need to be aware of and what makes it pretty cool, at least in my opinion, I actually think flipping properties subject to is the best way to go with the seller. So you take a subject to house over, you're taking their mortgage over, the deed's going into your name, you're making the payment for the seller, but the seller still has the loan in their name. So we've done these deals before where we would buy the house subject to, fix whatever problems, whether there's a tenant in there or the property needs work, whatever the case is. And then there's equity, and the seller's trading their equity to us for speed, convenience, certainty. And then when we sell it, sellers getting their loan paid off and we get our profit. So I think a lot of the times flipping houses short-term subject to is the safest way to go. So anyway, that's the truth about subject to investing. You got to really understand what you're doing. You need to know how the game is, especially in your individual state. I would avoid the high entry fees in the beginning. Flipping them short-term is the way to go. If you got value from this, do me a favor and leave a review, share the show, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're local to Seattle, where I just moved, or the Hudson Valley part of New York, Delaware, Reno, or San Diego, and you have a deal you want to wholesale to me or wholesale with me, send me an email, greg@velocityhousebuyers.com, and I'll see you on the next REI weekly lesson. Take care.